time. So, we're all worried about, of course, excessive carbon emissions. Well, not all of us. Here's Professor Michele Bachmann to explain that there's no problem at all.
But there isn't even one study that can be produced that shows that carbon dioxide is a harmful gas. There isn't one such study because carbon dioxide is not a harmful gas, it is a harmless gas. Carbon dioxide is natural, it is not harmful, it is a part of Earth's life cycle. But there isn't even...
All right, well, let's bring in an actual expert here to see if Michele Bachmann was right about that. Professor Kevin Gurney is at Arizona State University. He's also a member of the Global Carbon Project. It's an international coalition of scientists that study carbon emissions. He's also a member of like 28 other groups that study this. So, Professor Gurney, what do you think? Carbon dioxide is a perfectly lovely gas. What are you all complaining about?
Well, it's certainly true in a very strict sense that carbon dioxide doesn't necessarily directly influence a human being, but it has a great impact and a potentially negative impact on the planet when it builds up to the type of levels it's at now and the type of levels we're anticipating in the future.
So talk to us about that impact, because I think a lot of people hear that, but they don't know what real-world effects that it can have, and sometimes they're not sure if it's connected to the severe weather that we're seeing. How would it be connected to the severe weather if it is?
Yeah, certainly the scientific community, the consensus is that as the climate warms, driven by the increase in greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide, but there are others, that greater extremes in things like weather, so in things like hurricanes, droughts, tornadoes, will begin to occur at a greater frequency as the planet warms up. And this is not in many ways that surprising. It's very much akin to putting a lot more energy into any system. When you put a lot more energy into the climate system, which we do when we add carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, it expresses itself in more extreme ways. Greater amount of energy, and that energy gets expressed by greater extremities in things like rainfall, floods, droughts, and of course, another big concern, sea level rise.
So, Professor Gurney, people hearing that might be a little confused, saying, wait, now how could it produce droughts and floods at the same time? And how is that related to how warm it is? Now, you partly explained that through that there's more energy, but talk to us about how it produces those actual weather events.
Sure. As you put more energy into the climate system, actually what happens is we speed up what is referred to as the hydrologic cycle. That's the cycling of water between, for example, the ocean and the atmosphere, and then back down onto the land again, and ultimately back into the ocean. As you pour more energy into the system, we begin to sort of supercharge the hydrologic system. Hence, you can actually get, in some places, increases in snowfall, even though that appears counterintuitive to global warming. In some places, you can get increases in precipitation, increases in snowfall. In other places, less precipitation or less snowfall and droughts. And indeed, one of the things that's of most concern, for example, in the western United States where I live, is not so much an increase or decrease in precipitation, but that it'll come at different times, and hence very much rearrange the way we capture and use water, for example, in agriculture and in cities here in the West.
So, we've shown the charts on the show before about extreme weather events climbing from about 100 a year to all of a sudden in the last couple of years climbing all the way up to 250 extreme weather events. And of course that leads to the question of, are we already in the middle of climate change? Some people say, well, climate change will do X, Y, or Z in the future. But are we in the future? Is it happening right now?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. We've already seen an increase in temperatures that are roughly 3/4 to 1 degree over the entire planet. And certainly we are in the realm in which we've begun to change climate. I think what's of great concern is that the acceleration of this phenomenon. I always tell people that I'm not so concerned about the long-term increase of a few degrees. It means a lot for the energetics of the atmosphere, but what I am concerned about is the rate at which the change occurs. And we're entering an era in which the rate at which this change occurs is going to begin to accelerate. And that's of great concern.
All right, so I get that, but it's no problem, right? Because, Professor Gurney, at some point we can push a button and then we just bring it all back and then everything's fine, right?
Well, I wish it were that easy. I think that the difficulty is that the Earth atmosphere system is so large and is full of so much energy that it is very difficult, and there's been lots of research gone into finding ways in which we might be able to engineer our ways out of the problem. And heretofore, nothing has come up that looks like the quote-unquote silver bullet that people have been looking for. And of course, the thing that one certainly can suggest, aside from a solution to the sort of end of the problem, is to try to limit how much we drive the problem from the beginning. Lower our emissions, change activities, et cetera, et cetera.
So, Professor Gurney, final question for you is an unanswerable one, so it'll be fun. So if these things start to pick up much more quickly, then finally the American people goes, oh, right, climate change, this is what people were warning us about, and we've gotten to the point where it's irreversible, then it's too late. So how do we convince the public, and by the way, our government, whether they're Republicans or Democrats in this case, to take action before we've gotten to a point where it's irreversible?
Well, this is one of the very difficult attributes of the climate change problem, very different from many things that we've dealt with in the past, in that the timescales upon which it occurs are so long, and that activities that we engage in today will manifest themselves in decades to come. And by the time they do come, it is very difficult, at least with available technology and available knowledge, it is difficult to do much about things at that point. We're either going to be faced with adaptation, or we're going to begin a crash course in doing things like limiting emissions. I think it's probably more prudent to start these things now, though perhaps slowly and with certain sensitivity to economics, et cetera, but at least begin doing something about this problem now such that we don't face the need for a cataclysmic reduction in emissions or hope for some silver bullet that's going to solve the problem.
All right, Professor Kevin Gurney, a climate scientist at Arizona State University, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cenk.
All right, we're trying to do our part, letting you know what's happening. Your call on what we do about it, right? If you care, make sure that you let your politicians know. Now, when we come back, well, gun control is also out of control.